Hi, I'm Hannah Durden and you're listening to the Outdoors Group podcast. This podcast is a call to arms to get children and young people outside again. It's your one-stop shop for all things outdoor, child, young person and education related. Thanks for tuning in. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Paul Martin from the Devon Wildlife Trust. Paul is their Wilder Learning Team Leader and is passionate about working with young people to help them learn with, in, through and about nature. We'll be talking about the work that Devon Wildlife Trust does, their Wildlife Champions project and the idea of natural literacy. We've also got one of our directors, Tom Loday, with us today to join in the conversation. Thanks for coming today, guys.
Thanks for having us.
So a good place to start, I think, is by explaining who Devon Wildlife Trust are, Paul, and what they do.
Okay. So the Wildlife Trusts are an umbrella conservation organisation throughout the country, and each of the counties, or in some cases a couple of counties, have their own trust, and we're independent but work together on larger issues. So we're all about protecting habitats and spaces and campaigning for wildlife to improve the current situation, working a lot on wilding and sort of looking at how habitats and ecosystems could be returned to better ways than they are. We do lots of work with farmers. There's loads of projects all over, anything to do with conservation, marine side of work, because Devon is amazing.
I'm just saying Devon's a good spot to do it, right?
It is, two amazing coastlines, lots of spaces that are protected already, and we just work alongside and in partnership with loads of different conservation organisations to see the benefits of wildlife for people, but to see wildlife returning and improving for the next generation.
Awesome. And so what is your role within the trust?
Okay, so I lead a team of a few education-based officers who run projects in different parts of the county. So in Exeter, with some multi-academy trusts. So I steer the strategy for how we engage with schools and young people, hopefully on a lifelong journey of wildlife conservation, but connecting them to the natural world so that they are passionate about it.
Yeah.
So, there's a lot of evidence that suggests that pro-environmental behaviours comes from connection to nature as a child. So focusing on that aspect of things.
Yeah. And as well as strategy, you do on-the-ground work with the kids as well?
Yeah, lots of that over the years. I do talks and other activities, but more so lately as my team has grown, making sure that everyone's doing what they're meant to do and doing it well,
Yeah. So several years ago, you joined us to train as a forest school leader, which was to complement your work you're already doing, wasn't it? And Tom was your trainer. So it's nice to have the two of you back together. Can you tell us about how you found the course and how that training helped with what you were doing for the trust?
Well, to be honest, it was just a joy to be 5 days out in the woods with Tom. Although I never found anyone quite so intense about his tools. That was the first couple of days. No, it was brilliant. And I think we both realised at the time how mutually beneficial Forest School and the work of the Wildlife Trust could be, in terms of the ethos of the Forest School approach, which was really good for me to get into. I was coming from a teaching background, secondary school teaching, focus on targets, get them through, all of those sorts of things. And to have that time out and to just reflect on how a child approaches nature and different ways in which you can do that, that was really helpful for me just to, I suppose, reset my mind on those things. And it was the start of a beautiful friendship as well, which is always a good thing.
I was going to say, because Tom, you obviously trained, probably hundreds of people, but obviously you can't remember them all, but you obviously remembered Paul and you guys stayed in touch.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you find a natural synergy sometimes and you kind of align on ethos and understanding, and it was just really... it's really inspiring to see like a different angle, but I think it's going to take all approaches to kind of meet the challenges that these future generations are going to face. And it's nice to feel like in an alliance, and the work that Devon Wildlife Trust do is just absolutely fantastic, and their educational kind of team is right down there at the same core values that we have as well. And I think it's going to takes a whole village, doesn't it? And it takes a whole community of people. And I feel very aligned with all those things, and it's just wonderful to find opportunities where we can collaborate and support each other's.
And of course, it must be good because I sent my team individually.
Yeah.
Each time they've needed forest school training, I've sent them to you guys.
Send them to us. Oh, brilliant! That's what you want, isn't it? So did you use like your skills quite a lot? Did you, after you left the course, did you find yourself kind of using things you'd learned, or was it more that it just helped like shape your approach to kind of de-school a little bit?
Yeah, I think it did both really, because what we started to do was a bit of a pop-up forest school for places that had a bit of space but didn't really feel confident.
Yeah.
And then I think we've signposted them to you guys when they've wanted to take it on themselves.
Yeah.
But it just meant that we could say, yeah, we've got this background, we've got this way of approach. And I'm always keen on how do you weave something into a school curriculum as well, so that teachers feel comfortable and confident in taking their children outside.
Yeah.
So merging the ethos of achievement with that sort of child focused, trying to work that out. And so, I think it was probably the start of how I reviewed all of the work that we do in terms of contact with schools. So, I would say it was a pretty good turning point for my thinking.
Awesome. So I was reading about the Wildlife Champions project, which you guys have been running for 10 years last year, was that?
Yeah, so actually the first conversation I had about it was in 2010, and the first conference that we ran was 2011.
Okay.
And then obviously we've had something called COVID kicked in and sort of spoiled a couple of those years. It's the Wildlife Champions has been going for some considerable time.
Yeah, so I'd love to know about kind of what... when I was finding about it, I read an article when you'd spoken about this idea of natural literacy. So I was just wondering if you could tell me kind of what you meant by this natural literacy and why is it important?
Okay, so that phrase has just come out of, I've just finished doing a master's in education and was thinking about ways in which we approach learning and things like that around the outdoors. And one of the things that I wrote, one of my papers, was around this concept of natural literacy. So for me, the idea is quite simple. Literacy is all about reading and writing. If we are going to produce children who are literate in how to protect the natural world, they need to understand how to read their own place within that. So they need to be able to identify stuff, they need to know how habitats work, they need to know how their own personal choices have an impact on things.
Yeah.
So, the little bit of old school, like, I know what that plant is, I know when it comes up, I can read the sky a little bit, all of those kinds of things embedded in the place where they live. And then the writing side of it is about being able to put yourself into the future. So you're writing the future by the decisions that you make. So you are saying that in this story of the natural world, I have a place, I can read my place in it, but I know that my choices and my actions will write the future. So it's that idea that we're trying to get children to embed themselves in their place within the natural world, but see that they are also change makers for it.
Yeah.
So that's the idea of natural literacy, and we try to build programs so that it engages head, heart, and hands in that. Because I think if you're gonna, learn about, if you're gonna bug hunt, for example, how am I personally responsible for that creature that I've just found? Where am I going to put it? Because it lives in that home. So you've got their hands.
Removed it from
its home. I'm going to put it back carefully because I've got a responsibility for it. I could choose not to, and that affects the future of that creature. It might not feel like something to me now, but actually that's part of a bigger system that's part of a bigger system that I'm part of. So it's placing ourselves within it and understanding it and knowing that my choices have an effect.
Oh, I love that. And so the Wildlife Champions project, what did that involve, and how did you kind of get the concept of it into a practical application?
So when I was a geography teacher, those sort of moments that you have where you suddenly realise that you've been teaching something for a long time but nothing's changed.
Yeah.
So we've been educating about climate change for a very long time.
Yeah.
And I was teaching an A-level class about environmental issues, and I sort of played a trick on them, I suppose you could see it as. But I got a video from 1989 on climate change, which I'd seen when I was doing A-levels. Okay, ages me. And I showed it to them, and I said, okay, let's have a conversation about what the issues are raising. And they started talking. I said, and just as a curiosity, when was this produced? they said, oh, it must be recent.
Yeah.
And that was in 2005 when I showed it to them.
Yeah.
And they were just blown away when I said that these are the conversations that we've been having for close to 30 years. You know, it's ridiculous that nothing's changed. So for me, what I felt was we've been educating. We are pretty good at engaging children, but one of the things we don't seem to be able to do is empower them.
Yeah.
So Wildlife Champions was born out of that 3 E's. So I went and chatted to, it was very serendipitous, okay? So, you know, there are moments as well in life that something happens and you think this is meant to be. So I'd had this idea of a council for wildlife in schools that sat alongside a school council and made choices for wildlife that was representative of what the school wanted on their school grounds or in their local community. And I went and I was chatting to this amazing teaching assistant in Ladysmith Junior School. And while we were talking, she was saying, this is brilliant, we could do this here, etc., etc. The head walked in at the time, and she said, oh, you need to listen to this idea that Paul's got. I said it to her, and an hour or two later, she was signing off on 14 schools starting the Wildlife Champions because it was underneath sort of local or, you know, those learning communities at that time. And it just went from there. Little councils rising up in each of the schools. Yeah. We go and visit once every half term to sort of start them thinking about a project, get them rolling with the project and then celebrating the outcome.
Yeah.
And then once a year we gather all of the Wildlife Champions from an area and celebrate it with some sort of conference that's practical or just a bit of learning, but always outside.
Yeah. And those councils are made up of pupils from within the school?
Within the school. And some schools have moved it and they started moving it into school classes. So a year group would take on the responsibility of it. Yeah. And then so if you're a year 4,
you knew that was
when you get to year 4, you knew that that was going to be your year for being a wildlife champion. Yeah. So it's a really interesting project and it's morphed now. We've got like a selection of things you could choose to do as a council. So under like grounds, you could develop your grounds if you wanted to, but around insects or something like that. Then we've also got a marine wildlife champions one, so you could learn about and take action for the sea. We've got one in development at the moment around rivers and what goes down your loo and all of those kinds of things. Do you want to become a river champion? Yeah. And we've got another one around climate change. So we prepare resources to help the staff to deliver it when we're not there. But the whole aim is that the children's voice is heard within their context and for them to believe that they can make a difference.
Absolutely.
And something so small sometimes, but that's not, in a sense, the outcome is an irrelevance.
Yeah.
The process of understanding that you have a voice is massive.
Yeah.
So over 10, 12 years, we've averaged 20 plus schools doing it, averaging 10 different children per school. So you're talking about thousands of children that have already had the opportunity to feel like they've had a voice.
I think I'd pop back to the beginning of that story and I would just, to the listeners to this podcast, I'd say I feel similarly where if you're doing the right thing with the right intentions and if you put that out into the world, like talk about it, put it out there, write it down, get it out there, because I think people understand the right intentions and the right thing at the right place. It just starts to happen. I think if you've got it in your head, get it out there. Just start being proactive because it takes one little click and then it starts to gather some momentum.
Being an agitator.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we're teaching the children to be those agitators. And one of the things I used right at the beginning and continue to use, those mosaic pictures that you get, and when you look in closely it's actually made up of lots of individual pictures, and we do that with the children and say, look, concentrate on your picture, don't look at the big picture. The world is in a shocking state and you can be overwhelmed by it and you can feel worried about it, but if you don't look at that big picture and you zoom in and see that actually your little picture, make that look as beautiful as you can and as cared for, and trust that someone else somewhere else is doing the same thing, the whole picture will eventually
be changed. There's that kind of think global, act local kind of ethos.
Right back to that sort of Agenda 21 from when Rio Earth Summit kicked off in 92.
Yeah.
So that's when they're all. So that's part of what I believe is that if you can have small actions in local spaces that add up.
Absolutely.
You don't have to then look at the big picture. And part of my master's was researching the impact on children who had been wildlife champions about their vision of the future.
Yeah.
And I got them to draw pictures, and a lot of them drew much more positive pictures than the children who hadn't been. But I also looked at this scale, so I asked them to put us on a scale where they felt about the future of the world, miserable or ecstatic.
Yeah.
And most of the wildlife champions were fairly low because they understand. But then I gave them a second one that said, how do you feel about your ability to change it? Which was nothing to really. Most of the wildlife champions were towards the I can make a difference phase, whereas a lot of the other children were sort of at the low end.
I think it's through those processes, like you're saying, it is about process, and it is about empowering those leadership qualities within all of our young people and our communities widely. And I think, you know, programs like this, it is about the wildlife and what have you. But, you know, I started in the forest school education thinking, you know, we need to connect young people to nature so that they can understand it, to protect it and feel close to it, because their passion is important. But then there was a step as well, and I was like, these kids need to connect to themselves as well.
Absolutely.
You know, and it's like, there's no way they can stand up and take those leadership positions if they have no self-confidence, if they have no self-esteem, if they have no understanding of their place in their community and everything else that is the foundational steps or blocks in someone's life. And it's like we need all of those angles and all of those approaches, and which is where, you know, it is important to have some, like, an element of kind of the formalised education, but that kind of free play and that the benefits that bring through. And we need a whole massive system to support the young people to
I think there are so many negative messages that children are consumed by with what's been presented to them, and then we've had COVID and all of those things. We need all of these opportunities for them to explore who they are within the context of nature, because I think nature gives them time to reflect and step back. And but then if you're giving them the opportunity to physically make a change and do something positive, then they can start to learn that, one, they are valuable in the process, but two, that actually they can bring about change and be positive members of things going forwards.
Absolutely.
We call it constructive hope. That's a phrase I love to take with us. You realise that the problem is there, but you provide them with opportunities to make a difference, so that therefore you don't focus on the negative. You learn to focus on the things that you can achieve. They need
to experience that process of making
positive
change and impact.
Yeah, definitely. And there aren't many places where they can do that.
No.
And I think things like Forest School, getting them that freedom and personal growth, and then the opportunities for things like wildlife champions or school councils or other things that give them a belief that they have got something of value to offer. We need that everywhere.
I had a great personal example of that at the forest school groups where my kids go. They used to do take it in turns to be like the leader for the afternoon. And she's now 13, but I think when she first did, I think she was 7, and she was terrified of public speaking. And even though she saw these kids week in, week out, she was so nervous about having her role as a leader. And then fast forward 6 years, and she had another go at being a leader. I mean, she obviously had times in between, but it was just more the transformation. And this time around, she spent a week planning out a whole afternoon of activities, dividing everyone into groups, having a script, and then she went and ran like an improv, like, drama workshop. And I thought the difference, and obviously age takes a thing, but also I was like, this is consistently going into the woods and being with this group has like given her this confidence to direct them all in a way that she couldn't have years ago.
And she'll take all of those skill sets into whatever role she does. She doesn't have to be an environmental role.
No.
You know, this is the thing. We're not trying to create a wave of people who need...
Bug hunters.
Exactly. or entomologists or any of those things, but we'll get some along the way, hopefully, because we need them. But all of these skills and all of this passion and all of this belief can be filtered into a much more positive
absolutely.
society.
It needs to be a cultural change, and it's like whether we're working on the ground floor of the factory or we are the people in the khaki waistcoats and going around with their sample jars and everything.
Exactly. You've got to be whatever. If you've got an environmental conscience and you believe that you can make a difference from something you've done as a child, it doesn't matter what you contribute. In that sense, you can be a contributor to a positive future. I think that's the message that we really want to get out there.
That's a nice segue, because I was going to ask about the kind of the climate crisis and environmental education, and kind of as a general rule, what's the kind of the children, the young people you're working with? What's their kind of level of awareness? 'Cause obviously, you see like these amazing teenagers like Greta Thunberg and stuff, but on like, you know, I don't know, a class of 30, like what's their kind of
it's
level
hard,
of
isn't
concern?
it? For a very long time, schools had to teach a balance and suggest that it wasn't happening, you know, as much as it was happening.
Yeah.
So you've got a generation who may have been taught something that was quite confusing.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of awareness, but then you've got another generation where it's almost been filtered entirely out of their education system completely. So all they're getting is social media or media reports that are always negative. And I sometimes find our nature programs a bit depressing because they almost always end with that, and then climate change will mean that these creatures aren't there. And there's that sort of, you've got this window into a far off, nature's over there somewhere and you're never going to see it.
Start emotionally let go of the polar bears.
Yeah,
it's going to happen.
But what about, you know, the creatures that are on your doorstep that you can actually have a physical connection with? So how does climate change affect them? And actually, how do we positively give messages of hope about what we can do to mitigate it? Because they don't appear in education.
No.
Formally. So there's almost like this great awareness of this thing, but actually what is it? What's it doing? How will it affect us? So I was privileged to be asked to write something called Nature's Climate Heroes for the Wildlife Trusts, which is a pack around how nature-based solutions can address climate change. So they're available for people to download who are teachers. And it's sort of based around the idea that nature's already doing the work for climate change. It just needs us to let it get on with it.
Yes.
Because I think we need to be careful of lauding humanity as the white knight riding in to save things, when actually we're pretty much the problem.
Cause, yeah.
So what we designed it around was 4 superheroes. So soil and salt marsh and leaves.
Yeah.
And one other one, I can't remember now, it's a little while since I wrote it. And then their associated friends. So like for soil, we had peat and compost and things like that. And then it works its way through explaining how nature mitigates climate change on its own, and then leads to campaigns or things that the children can act on, even in their school grounds, to help the heroes to do their job. So awesome. We're not the key players. Yeah. Nature's the key player, but we can be their assistants. And we did all these top secret folders of all of their skill sets and, you know, like a secret agent file and stuff like that. So it's quite a nice, engaging way, but it tells positive stories as well. And I think that's the real key thing. Positive stories of influence over something that is big, scary, and not really well known.
Yeah. I think it's big and scary. And I think, you know, as young people have greater access to media, and there are world leaders out there who are climate skeptics, and everyone sort of, a lot of people, there is a big voice out there in the scientific inverted commas community about climate change, and you know there is so much information, and people are trying to predict and model a hugely complicated thing. Like if you look at the Met Office just down the road in Exeter, like their supercomputer is not big enough to comprehend and calculate all this different information. But it's like, okay, well let's just hypothetically say climate change doesn't exist, but we do know that pollution causes cancers and lung problems, and we do know that oil going into the sea does kill seabirds, and we you know that regardless we need fresh air. It's healthy for us, and it's it's like that, whichever angle, like we still need to put this protection in, and it's like we need to get a strong message out to the climate change critics. It's like, well, okay, believe what you believe, but you still need to be a steward of your environment.
Yeah. It's interesting how truth can be constructed according to what your worldview is. Yeah. You know, that's the problem that we face, isn't it? And
it's a
big
huge
voices
problem
out there that are constructing a truth that isn't based in the reality that we're seeing.
But it is still their truth and their reality that they're living, and we have to work within those confines.
Yeah. It's like polar opposites. How do you draw them onto a same line?
Ultimately, the truth is the truth, and the truth is that we have one planet, and we need fresh air to live, and you know all those things. You know, oil will run out at some point, and the global temperatures, for whatever cause, are going up, and these things have happened naturally in the past, of course. But there's data that follows the trend.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
you can critique that, fair enough, and that's your truth, and that's your your right to do so. And I think it's important that it is critiqued.
Yeah,
I think that is part of the scientific process. But at the end of the day, like, nature is nature. Yeah. And there's just no getting around that.
We put so much weight on the shoulders of the next generation as well, and we need to be recognising that we need to give them opportunities to be involved in those conversations.
Absolutely.
Rather than saying, you're the ones who are going to deal with the problems. It's your responsibility now.
And it's like
outrageous.
Everything we can do to hold as much of the burden now, and create those spaces for them and guide them through, and do every little step we can do in our generations to support that.
And that's the point of giving them a voice in something that they can make a difference on.
Absolutely.
Because then they slowly build up the belief that they can make a voice on something bigger.
Comes back to your mosaic, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I spoke to a teenager who said to me, well, there's no point, is there? Because the people with the power aren't going to change anything, so it doesn't matter what we do. And I thought, that they needed to hear that mosaic.
And that's, they talk about, is it eco-melancholia, where you sort of get to that point where you just collapse in on yourself because you can't believe. So,
I've been there myself.
Yeah, I think we've all been there at some point. And I think it's, how do we, mental health wise, how do we teach our young people and ourselves to sort of step back from that massive overwhelming picture and go, right, okay, what can I do?
Yeah.
And that contact with nature that refreshes and refills us, teaching them methods for their own personal well-being within the context of the natural world, then leading them into effective change of their local spaces, can then draw them out of that eco-anxiety, melancholia, whatever you want to call it, to a place where they are functioning and contributing to change. Because we can't do it on our own. And that's another reason why I say to the Wildlife Champions, I can't do it on my own. We need you. Yeah. This is our message. You can now tell it to other people, and they can tell it to other people. And believe it or not, it'll get around the world really quickly.
This is pretty much like an ancient kind of parable as well. Of like, I remember, when I was young, I went to a C of E school, and we get taught the Bible stories. And I remember one where an old lady or something gave like her last penny to the church, and a rich man gave a big bag of coins or whatever it was.
Yeah.
But the lady that gave the penny gave everything she had. And it's like, it's understanding that whatever your contribution is, wherever your circumstance in life, it might not be that you can actually do a lot because you have limited resources and you have time and pressure in your life, but where you are actually giving the best you can. And I think it's having that understanding that is all we can ever ask of someone is their best and their all, and that is kind of variable, because I'm in a very privileged position where I have a company full of like inspiring, enthused people, and I can give them a platform to make a bigger wave of change, and that's why it's important for the Wildlife Trust that we have these. But if you're struggling at home, you still can make those small choices, and that's everything you can do. That is everything, and you should be proud of it and take positivity from that rather than feeling like a failure. And it's like these ancient stories, they're all there.
They're all still there. And we I think the other thing we underestimate is the power of a child in a home.
Yes.
So there's a really interesting project in America, I think they're called the Earth Rangers or something like that, and I read an evaluation report on it. And they found that the parents of the children who were attending regularly were more environmentally conscious in their behaviours than the general population.
Well, they're getting guilted by the kids, basically.
So a really good... when I was teaching, I had a parents' evening, and this dad walked in, and he just sat down, he looked at me and he said, "Are you the reason I've had to change all of my light bulbs?" And I said, "Probably. Gladly."
Probably, yes.
And you just think a child at home can have a voice.
Yes.
And in circumstances where they get that opportunity.
It's just become a leadership of change in his own community.
So it's, we talk, you and I often, we talk a lot about the system and how that needs to change. But I think we need to target the grassroots at the same time as the system, so that eventually the two will meet. And
we have to empower that grassroots and give that platform. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's
Sorry, you reminded me. My son did a litter pick in our local park, and he got back with his bag of rubbish and said, "What do I do with that? I said, just shove it in the black bin." And he was like, "No, you need to sort it." I was like, "Oh."
Yeah.
And like, I always recycle, but it was just about, it was all this like muddy, gross stuff. I was like, "Fine, that's fine."
It has
Some
to be
gloves.
clean plastic to recycle.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And then I was like cursing all my neighbours, being just cleaning up all your muck to recycle. But you know, he was right. You know, it was the right thing to do.
I think there is a certain amount of pressure on stuff. Is like what I find like immensely frustrating about some of the green movement is that you're always slightly compromised. Like if you want to buy like a plastic-free toothbrush, it's always a bit like it doesn't seem to scrub your teeth that well, you know.
Yeah.
And like some of the eco soap is a bit like.
And you know, and there's always a cost, isn't there? You know, like
It's always more expensive, and I think you know there's like if you buy like the plastic-free refillable what have you, like you're saving the council money, but you still pay the same amount of council tax, and the products will probably cost you a bit more as well. So you're kind of losing on both fronts. And there's like within the system there is no accountability for like if you produce plastic, then like the cost of that recycling process is externalized to the taxpayer. Yeah. But if a taxpayer's taken the responsible choice not to use plastic, they're still paid for it twice.
Yeah. So what's the incentive for anyone, especially in cost of living times, to behave environmentally when the tariffs and the things on top of that
we need to put the cost back onto the producers of waste.
And like, why are we not sort of talking about, you know, from the very inception of a design process, what are we going to do with this once it's finished?
Or designing out stuff, or designing the flow of the product.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, you know, it's hard, isn't it? Because when you're at the sharp end and making those decisions, and we're asking families to do that, where's the accountability above that? And that's often, I think, what puts people off, you know, and it puts young people off when they see the hypocrisy, their perceived hypocrisy of what is being said and what's being done.
What's been done,
Yeah, I know.
And it's like, well, if you're always kind of like having to fight upstream, it can get really, really tiring.
And how do you build the resilience in? You know, resilience is another area, isn't it? That by going into forest school, particularly, you build up their resilience to the weather, and if you haven't succeeded, you do it again. And you know, like that fire, even with simple as fire lighting or using a saw or something like that. But resilience against a tide that feels like it's pushing you back every time you do something good is what we need to build that in. And I think our wildlife champions have had experiences where they've sown flower meadows externally and then they've been mown because there hasn't been any communication, and they get really frustrated. But we get them out and they do it again somewhere else, and we try and
communicate better.
Try and say, right, we need to overcome this hurdle and this barrier that's in the way. So it's quite hard, but it's so hard for them. You see their faces when it's been cut, and it's like, no, how did that happen? You know, and it's just been. The will was there, but it just didn't get to the person who was holding the strimmer.
Yeah.
You know, and it's that whole system approach that's saying, if we're going to do this, we need this person and this person and this person to know that it's happening. And I think, again, that's where working is in partnerships across different organisations, government, non-government, you know, you guys as well. Yeah. It spreads the message, and we get that communication better. Not always right, but better.
Definitely. Yeah. No, it is going to take the whole society and communities to push this forward and become resilient enough. Like, as individuals, it is hard to be resilient enough, but united.
When you live in a street and there's like everyone else has got 3 cars and you're cycling to work, you know,
in the rain,
and you just
slip on the ice.
Come on, we can do this. We can do this. It's just challenging, isn't it? It's always been challenging, and I think some of the character of people who are in this just has to be just, you know, slightly bloody minded, and we're going to get change eventually. We are going to.
There has to be no other outcome in your mind.
Yeah,
you have to just dogged determination.
So the Wright brothers said if people aren't laughing at your dreams, then they're not big enough.
Yeah,
which I love.
Yeah, I love
because
that.
We're going to change the education system.
Yeah,
right. There you go.
Yeah,
we're going to.
Yeah, it's already happening.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to happen.
It's going to happen. Just before we finish up, have you just on that? Well, I guess on the eco-anxiety thing, have you got any tips for kind of parents or educators listening to this if they've got kids that are getting that, like, or how to empower them? I mean, we've talked quite a lot about it. Get outside.
Just get time to slow down and notice.
Yeah.
You know, we did quite a lot of just give them a colour chart or something and let them go and wander and find lots of different colours in nature and then sit and just have those reflective moments. Because essentially, where is the time to do nothing anymore? You know, we blame a lot on screens, and okay, I think there is an element to that addiction to, you know, being on technology, but that isn't the fault.
No.
That isn't the root of it, and I think we need to be careful not to just dump blame in one direction. But I think the busyness of life, you've got to put in that space to slow down, because we don't have. We're almost constantly living in fight or flight or drive forwards, you know, and we don't do that rest and reflect enough. But that's an attitude of mind, and society doesn't push parents in that direction. You know, it's not the fault of parents that they have to both work and fill their days with things, you know, but there is space to just find a green bit of space and just sit. Yeah. Just sit, listen to the birds, do something quiet, and that reflection and that time in your day. I think they did a study on children who take Ritalin and have ADHD. 20 minutes walking outside in a green space is equivalent to their stretch of their concentration afterwards of the same as a full dose of Ritalin at its best.
That's amazing.
So build in 20 minutes of walking into a child's day. We might be able to demedicate our children a little bit.
Yeah. Amazing. Thanks so much for the time today. I know you've had a busy day.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure to talk, isn't it?
It's just been nice to hear you guys chat and to be able to facilitate the conversation. Is there anything else you want to say about DWT before I ask you the last few questions?
No, I mean, you know, we are available for schools, educators. Just drop us a line. We're interested in journeys for schools, you know, if they want to embed nature-based learning into what they do. We're able to support and facilitate almost anything, really. We've got loads of experience in the team now. And we think it can really benefit all aspects of school life. So we're
get in touch.
We're there. We're there, just easy to look up.
Awesome.
Yeah, I think if you're in doubt and you want to just reach out to someone that is on your side, as it were, for becoming keener and greener, get in touch with your local wildlife trust, and they are a wealth of expertise, and you will be met with kind of really passionate individuals, and it's only going to be a positive thing. And if you've got that idea, like I said before, push it out into the world, make the call, have the conversation. Yeah,
there always feels like there's barriers, but right across the Wildlife Trust movement, there are loads of incredible people with lots of great ideas to overcome those barriers and have a lot of fun along the way too, actually.
My friend works for one down near Chichester, and they just, I think it's a massive project, they've just rerouted a river because the river was going through. I can't. You know where I'm talking about it. It was absolutely fantastic. I mean, they had to find like a specialist because obviously like this is an insane thing to do, and they had to talk to all the farmers and get permission, and watching the progress of this, the new pathway, and then the life coming into it, and then the river at the other end, which was like dead before, is now just thriving. It's just incredible. Yeah, and there's amazing wilding projects all over. You know, I think Kent are bringing back looking at buffaloes and buffaloes. And we've had the beavers, the reintroduction of beavers here. What buffalo? Is it European bison? European bison. That's it. Honestly, I always forget buffalo and bison. It's the old joke, isn't it? You can't wash your hands in one of them. But you know, it's that sort of So they incredible experience of trying to work out how do you bring back species that are challenging to live with, and change society's view of that. And there's some amazing stuff going on all over the place. There was noises about wolves on Exmoor at one point, wasn't there? Yeah, it's a more gentle approach, I think, with those sorts of things. I think those are challenging species to talk about. And we have to recognise first, before we go anywhere else, that we've got truncated food chains and things like that in this country, and there's so much we can talk about. That's one for another day. That gets into politics and all of the things around that, but it's exciting to see that there is a willingness and an eagerness to look at these things, and more partners are open to those things. You all started to touch on it ever so slightly a minute ago, was that the 3-letter word, fun. Yeah. And it's like, whatever you're doing out there in the environment, like,
have fun with it.
Sure,
Like
yeah.
this is an opportunity to, if you're doing like an eco project or making a wildflower meadow, this is an opportunity to connect, have a laugh, have a joke, Like it's always like, we've got to save the planet. And we do, but we can have fun doing it.
It's much more fun when you lie down and look at the clouds and kind of create weird characters out of them, and then just realise that you're just really relaxed and laughing and joking, and then you can do something else positive. It's
just be a bit silly, have a bit of fun, let go, enjoy the process.
We know how to do that.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Absolutely.
That's for sure.
Excellent. Well, that seems like a nice place to finish up, and I'll quickly ask you my questions, Paul.
Yeah.
And I know you're a busy person, but how do you relax?
Well, it's just being outside, isn't it? Go for a run, walk the dog, go to the beach, swim, any of those sorts of things. I find that particularly relaxing. I like being in spaces where it feels wild. It feels like there's nobody else around, and you can just be quiet. Bird watching as well. Oh, I love bird watching. That's very mindful.
What's the
Twitcher?
Twitcher, yeah.
Yeah, I suppose. But Twitchers are those wonderful people who drive all over the place to see the rarities. I'm just quite happy to
see a robin.
Keep a list of the birds that I see around the local walk that I do.
Okay.
And over the last year, I think it was over 40 species just in a small little loop walk around.
Any interesting finds in the area?
Everything. I mean, everything's interesting.
All right. Anything unusual that there's like more of a rarity or a scarcity?
Not particularly. Yeah, they're all just really good. They're just great. You learn to listen for them and things like that as well. So when the willow warblers come back and they start calling at the top of the trees, and you can go, oh, that's my first one of the year because you've been listening. And I think that's the thing, isn't it? You get to know your space. So that when something different does appear, you go, oh,
that's new.
What's that noise? Or that's something else. So I find that quite mindful and relaxing. Yeah.
And what are you reading or listening to right now?
Normally, I have a big fantasy series or something on the go just to switch my mind away from stuff. But at the moment, I'm reading The Hidden Life of Trees, which I've meant to be read a long time ago, which is brilliant. And I'm also reading Life Between the Shores, which is all about a guy who built a rock pool and watched how it developed.
Okay.
And so and then he unpacks each of the creatures and how they live and how they interact with one another. So they're a bit worky, but then my wife says I'm mad. I read textbooks all the time on nature.
If you love it, you love it.
You love it, and fill your time with
I was
it.
about to say, at least you get to do what you love for a job.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, it's a real privilege to do that.
And finally, why is being outdoors important to you?
I am, as most people realise when they meet me, a lot taller than I look on Zoom or Teams. So I'm big, and I love to be made to feel small. So like being out in a thunderstorm or on the side of a mountain walking or in a woodland or at the ocean when the waves are crashing. I like to be made to feel really small in the context of something that is so much bigger than me and to be in awe of the power of it. And I think that's quite humbling and quite...
Completely identify with that feeling.
It's a freeing feeling, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. If you're small, then your problems become even smaller as well.
I was about to say, I think that is the most common answer we've had. It's some form of perspective.
Yeah, I
love it.
World. I love it. That they all talk about that biophilia, that love of nature that's come from
David Orr's
historical sort of open savannas and things like that, and I've had the privilege of living in Africa for a while, and just those big open spaces that are there and empty. He just makes you realise that you are just a very, very small part of something way beyond your comprehension.
Amazing. Well, thanks so much.
My pleasure. It's been a joy to be with you both.
Yeah, it's been lush.
Brilliant.
Good luck editing.
No, all good. A big thank you again to Paul from the Devon Wildlife Trust and to Tom, one of our directors, for that conversation. I really enjoyed finding out a bit more about what the Devon Wildlife Trust does and our conversation about empowering young people to be change makers and our conversation about natural literacy. I hope that you enjoyed listening, and don't forget that if you're local and want to get involved with the Devon Wildlife Trust, you can go and check them out on their website or social media. In regards to the podcast, as always, if you would be so kind as to share it, subscribe, rate it if you enjoyed it, just so that more people can find us, that would be great. I think that's all for now, and we'll be back in 2 weeks. Thanks for listening.